Hi everyone! Welcome to another episode of Office Hours with the Professor. As always, I'm your host, William the Professor Collis, and I'm kind of flipping the script a little this week. Last week, I covered a news story that was arguably like the biggest news ever in esports and gaming, and you'd have to be under a rock to have missed. This week, we're going to change things up and cover a news story that was relatively smaller and didn't get a lot of press, but I think is pretty important. So without hesitating, we're going to dive in. I'm going to tell you what that story is. And it is Shueisha is going to start making games. Now, I know what your first reaction to this is. Who is Shueisha, right? Like, who are these guys? And the answer is they're the publishers of Shonen Jump, which is probably the most popular weekly serialized manga in Japan. And Shonen Jump has published, many of the classic manga and anime stories that, you might be familiar with. Like, I think they did Naruto, One Piece, even the original Dragon Ball. Obviously, previously you could get, Shueisha published properties in game format. I mean, there have been Dragon Ball and Naruto games before, but these were really licensed, aggressively licensed games. And the change here is now Shueisha is actually being involved in game creation itself. So why did I want to cover this story? Why did I think this was a fun one? Well, first of all, it's just somewhat important news. This is a new games development studio coming into being with a company with access to some pretty major brands. So you might actually be interested in games produced by these guys, and you might want to be aware that this probably signals more games coming for the Shueisha, content library. So that's the first piece, but that's sort of a lesser reason. The main reason is I think this is a really great highlighter of a trend. We are going to see games companies moving into businesses that are adjacent to but related to games. For example, the classic emblematic example of this is Riot Games going into music, right? But we're also going to see the converse. More and more, we are going to see traditional businesses that are engaged in activities that are close to or feed into or are adjacent to games going into making games themselves. And this is what we see with this Shueisha story, but it's also what we see with, for example, Annapurna doing Annapurna Interactive, which actually did one of my favorite games ever. What was it called? Blank on the name. Outer Wilds. There we go. So, I think this is a really key trend for people to be aware of, because what's really happening is as the tools to make games are being used more widely. The classic example is the Unreal Engine being used to make TV shows like The Mandalorian, right? The ability to make games and the ability to make things related to games is really converging pretty rapidly. And games are so multidisciplinary. You have to make music for games. You have to make, videos for games, right? What are cutscenes? You have to sort of make TV shows, right? You have to be a great storyteller, to have games have a great story. All these things are converging. And the point of convergence, I think, is happening faster than people might realize. So overall, I give this story about Shueisha moving into making games a B, only because I wish we knew more about what games they were going to make. But the trend itself gets a big A. And I hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Office Hours with the Professor, and I'll look forward to sharing more with you soon.